Welcome back to This is a Commander channel, where this is a Commander channel, and today I'm going to be talking about Commander, tough rules, and cool interactions, episode 165. Today's episode is going to take a look at a possible new series that I do want to do. I don't have an official name for it, so for now, I'll include it here in the Tough Rules and Cool Interactions series, as this one specifically does actually tie into a little bit of rules, trickery, and such. This series will be your classic hidden gems kind of a series, cards that don't see a lot of play, or they just should in general see a whole lot more play. Either they're old cards and therefore unknown to a lot of players, or because of some tricky rules interactions, people don't know that they should be running this card in their deck, or in the case of today's card, probably a whole lot of their decks. And speaking of today's card, it is Moonsilver Key, a uncommon artifact from Innistrad Midnight Hunt, and according to EDHREC, it sees play in just over 70,000 decks, which does sound like a lot, but with it being a colorless artifact, it can actually go into well over 5 million decks. So that is just around 1% attach rate. So let's get into its effect and see why I have picked it for this episode. It has the activated ability for one generic, tap, and sack to search your library for an artifact card with a mana ability or a basic land card. Reveal it and put it in your hand, then shuffle. I'm not going to really focus on the basic land part of it. There's not much craziness there. I've seen this card used in a few different games that I've played, probably less than 5, and it's almost always used to search for the same thing, or really just one thing every single time. I don't think it's even almost always. I think it is always. It has gotten a Soul Ring. Now, that's all cool. We all know the power of Soul Ring, but it really shines on turns 1, 2, and 3 for those really explosive starts to a game. However, this key can do so much more, and that's because of some of these cards that I'm going to be going over in this video. Some of these cards, we don't really think of them as having a mana ability. So, okay. Are you running an Aristocrats deck? A deck that you end up needing to have a sack engine to trigger all of your dice triggers? Maybe something like an Atla Palani Nest Tender, and you need to sacrifice your eggs, but because you're not in the color black, you don't have access to a lot of sack outlets, especially free sack outlets. If so, you're probably running cards like Phyrexian Altar and Ashnod's Altar. And then in a similar vein, if you're in an Artifactocrats, I don't know if that's a real term people use, but I do, or you're just in an artifact-focused deck in general, then you're likely running a card called Crack Clan Ironworks. Now, if you have any of these 3 cards in one of your decks, they are oftentimes some of, if not the most powerful or crucial cards in that deck. So a colorless way to search for them, no matter what the color identity of your deck is quite powerful, and you can search for them. They are mana abilities. Now, be careful though. In the upcoming Aether Drift set, we are getting a new Lotus called Radiant Lotus, and it's basically a fixed version of KCI, of Crack Clan Ironworks, but it doesn't contain a mana ability because it does require a target. Similarly, the Aether Spark also does not contain a mana ability, as it's a loyalty ability, and loyalty abilities cannot be mana abilities. There's another one called Lotus Ring. It's another artifact that looks like it contains a mana ability, but in actuality, it just has an ability that grants a mana ability to the object that it attaches to, but it itself does not have a mana ability. Okay, now enough negative ones and enough things that don't work with it. Let's get back to some cool things that you can search with it. One of the main reasons that I wanted to make this video is that most Magic players, when you ask them to think of mana abilities, they go towards activated mana abilities. That's just what we think of when we think of mana abilities. But there are triggered mana abilities in Magic, and you can find them defined in the comprehensive rules in section 605, and there aren't as many of them in the game as activated abilities in terms of being on, like, artifacts. There's not a lot, but the ones that do have these abilities, oftentimes a lot of them are very, very powerful. A lot of them are the mana doublers that we see oftentimes in monocolored decks or even two-color decks that just heavily lean towards one color. And these are cards like Extraplanar Lens, Caged Sun, Forsaken Monument for colorless decks, and Gauntlet of Power. There is also a very old card from Alpha, Beta, and Unlimited. I didn't even get a printing in any other set after that, official sets. It's an old card called Gauntlet of Might, and it is specific to red creatures for its Anthem and Mountains for the mana ability. And so yeah, each of these that I've listed here, they all have a triggered mana ability and even an Anthem on them, all but the Extraplanar Lens. And speaking of colorless decks, when talking about Forsaken Monument, while it isn't a triggered mana ability like the ones I've been talking about, Doubling Cube is one of the few options that a colorless deck has for big, crazy ramp in that mid to late game. It's also still good in any colored decks. You could use it in monocolored decks or 5 color decks. But in a colorless deck, it is really nice to have it as another card that you could dig to find with this key. Baba Lysaga, Night Witch, is a pretty popular commander that likes to run those lands that are also artifacts so that you can keep sacrificing them and then replaying them from your graveyard over and over and over, because Baba Lysaga cares about things having multiple card types. So you run the key in order to be able to search for those. Yes, the key says you can search for a basic land, and those lands, like Darksteel Citadel, are not basic. But they are an artifact card, and their text box does contain a mana ability. So you can get them via the key. I have mentioned my Urza Prince of Krug deck in the past in a couple videos before this one, and that deck really does like to have the artifact lands, especially the indestructible artifact land that I can run in there. They are amazing in this deck because I can use his ability to make token copies, soldier token copy versions of those lands, and they avoid a lot of the blue and white board wipes that only hit non-land permanents. They exile non-land permanents or return all non-land permanents, so they keep around from that. And then if the board wipes happen to be damage or destruction based for creatures, then that indestructibility really helps. So having this kind of a key to search up these kind of artifact lands, if you're in a deck that cares about artifacts or anything like that, if you want these artifact lands, a really, really good way to be able to search those up. Again, especially if you're not in green, where you have that ease of use of being able to just search for a land. Now, before I get to some more positive things that you can search for with the key, I do want to clarify some other cards that you cannot use the key to search for, and it is such a shame too, because these can be amazing sources of ramp in a colorless deck, or just any deck that cares about having a lot of artifacts in general. Neither Blinkmoth Urn nor Karn Legacy Reforged's abilities are mana abilities. The reason for this, you can find it defined in CR 605.1b, and that states that a triggered ability is a mana ability if it meets all of the following criteria. It doesn't require a target. It triggers from the activation or resolution of an activated mana ability or from mana being added to a player's mana pool, and it could add mana to a player's mana pool when it resolves. So, yeah, it's that part there towards the middle about how it triggers from the activation or resolution of a mana ability. And the abilities on both Karn and the Urn are turn-based triggered abilities. You didn't tap anything or activate anything for the Urn and the Karn to be able to make that mana. You just went into your upkeep or you went into your pre-combat main phase. Similar to this, the Tanuki Transplanter, a really cool card in green. I love this card, especially if you're in a green deck with a big commander that you can consistently get out. It does not contain a triggered mana ability, as the trigger event is that the creature is attacking, so no luck for searching for that Tanuki transplanter. Now, I just want to list a whole bunch of amazing utility artifacts that see, for a lot of these, a ton of play in all sorts of kinds of decks, and these all happen to also be mana rocks of some sort. They have a mana ability on them. So even if you never plan to use them specifically for their mana, if you don't need them as a mana rock or mana source, these can all be searched for with the key, and I hope that this crazy list gives you an idea of just how versatile this key is and why it should see a whole heck of a lot more play in Commander, probably in your decks. Starting off with a very big one, the Great Hinge. It does so many things, from helping with +1/+1 counter synergies, triggering life gain effects, and of course the main reason that most people play it, which is the card draw. And even though the life gain is tied to the ability that makes mana, that isn't one of the things that violates what makes it a ability that is a mana ability. So use this key in your green decks if you want to run this powerful hinge and get it out more consistently. The bobbleheads from the Fallout precons can be a very powerful set of cards in the right decks, especially when you're making token copies of them, like in a Urza Prince of Krug deck. But you can use the key to help you get the right bobblehead that you need at that time. If you're wanting the evasion one, if you're wanting to buff some creature, if you're wanting the card draw, if you just need to make treasure tokens and maybe just win. So you can use this key to find the exact bobbleheads that you want. The Dragon Orb cycle of artifacts are pretty dang powerful, obviously in Dragon decks, and probably the best one, in my mind at least, is the Carnelian Orb of Dragonkind, because haste is always important when you're spending such large amounts of mana on your big creatures. You don't want to have to wait to attack with them. You want to be able to get that attack in that turn. Get those combat damage triggers, get those attack triggers, get whatever you're trying to do that turn. So being able to search for this Dragon Orb is really nice for that key. Both Heraldic Banner and the more recent Patchwork Banner are just perfect mana rocks in your tribal decks or your go wide decks if you just have a lot of creatures that you're making of the same color or same creature type. And when you just really need that anthem that happens to come along with these rocks as well as the little bit of mana ramp, then the key can help you to get there. Relic of Legends is probably the best mana rock in any legendary themed deck. Getting around Summoning Sickness to use your legendary creatures for mana of any color the very turn that they come out is just bonkers. If you're in a Super Friends deck with a lot of Planeswalkers, then something like Honor-Worn Shaku is one of your best friends, letting you now basically turn your Planeswalkers into mana dorks. And both of these cards, the Honor-Worn Shaku and Relic of Legends, you can search for them with the key. While Legends Matters decks are not always 5 colors, there is some overlap, and this main category is for the 5 and 4 color, and a really powerful mana rock for those kinds of decks that have, and this card I've never actually seen anyone play this card, is Prismatic Geoscope. And I don't know why. I mean, I have my suspicions. I assume that it's because of the whole enters tapped aspect of it, but it can tap for 5 mana for a 4 mana investment, which is quite good. Even in a 4-color deck, it isn't all that bad on the return. A 5 mana rock that can tap for 4, still pretty good. The really cool thing with it, though, is that it's great for fixing your colors, so perfect for a 5-color deck. If you're in a 5-color deck and you only have 3 of the basic land types that you need, let's say Plains, Island, and Swamp, so you're missing your Mountain and Forest, so to get to your 5-color commander, to get all 5 of your colors, the wording on this Geoscope is really cool because the number of mana that you produce with it is based on the different land types you have, but the colors that you get to pick are not, and you can mix and match. So by having that white, blue, and black from those 3 lands that we mentioned earlier, you can actually tap this thing for red, red, and green, or green, green, red. You could get those missing colors that you need. A very cool rock that should definitely see more play. I'd even see this in like 3-color decks. It's not that bad. A 5-mana rock that makes 3. I see cards that do that, but I've never seen this Geoscope. Now, if you're in a Voltron deck, or just a deck that really cares about attacking or combat damage, maybe it's like a Ishin or something like that, you just need a lot of attacking triggers or combat damage triggers, you probably do run cards that give evasion to ensure that your creatures get through safely. If so, Sonic Screwdriver is a mana rock, but it also has 3 solid other abilities. Specifically, in this case, the ability to make any creature unblockable. Heck, you could even use it, politically to make some political deals and tell your opponents that you'll make their creature unblockable if it doesn't go at you. So you can use the key to search this kind of thing up and find that unblockability. Staff of Completion is another card like the Screwdriver with just a bunch of different utilities to it. Destroying your own permanent, obviously that doesn't come up often, but making mana, getting card draw, and even proliferating is something that a lot of decks are likely going to want to do. I actually have a John Irenicus Shattered One deck that uses all the modes on the staff, even the one where you want to destroy your own thing, because once in a while, when I do get down to a 1v1 with that deck, doesn't happen often, it's not a very powerful deck, but I do sometimes need to destroy my own creatures that I've given out to my opponents so that they can't use them to kill me, even though they're goated in a 1v1. You can attack the goading player with your goated creature. But I also use the proliferate part of it to buff all the creatures that I've given over the course of the game to my opponents so that they can kill each other with them. So it's a very, very powerful tool that I would want to search for. Pyromancer's Goggles is a very powerful instant and sorcery copier. One of the things that makes it great, other than the fact that it's a mana rock that does copy things at no additional cost, is that because the copy effect is tied to a mana ability, players cannot respond to it. They could counter the actual Pyromancer's Goggles, but once it's out, they're probably not going to waste their things on that because it's not the actual kill spell. But once you do activate it, it's a mana ability, so it doesn't use the stack, and the stack is now empty, meaning that you have priority and you cast whatever spell you want, and there will be a triggered ability going off to copy that spell now. But players don't oftentimes run stifle type effects as often as the usual things that only counter spells. But if you use cards like Reverberate or Dualcaster Mage, then they could actually be more easily countered, and that could stop you from pulling off a copy of your spell. The Enigma Jewel is something that blew up when it was first spoiled, but now it seems to see very little play, and I'm not sure why, as it is very, very good in the right deck. Super Friends decks, being able to get this thing that can have a bunch of activated loyalty abilities from planeswalkers that have gone to your graveyard. If you're in a self-mill deck where you're sending a lot of permanents to your graveyard, if any of those have any activated abilities, really just anything with just a few different activated abilities, and now this card has become quite powerful. Even just as a rock, a mana rock, because when you do craft itself, it does get its own tap for 2 mana ability. So even just a rock that taps for 2 mana that you can use for activated abilities, but this thing can now copy every non-mana activated ability that you use. If you have a commander with an activated ability that isn't a mana ability, that seems pretty solid to me, and a great thing that you can search with this key. Okay, let's start to wrap this episode up with these last 3 artifacts. The Mightstone and Weakstone, which is actually just one artifact, despite me saying and. The Golden Throne, and Throne of Eldraine, 2 thrones. They all can add more than 1 mana each, but that's not what makes them great. It is nice, they are really good mana rocks, but the Mightstone and Weakstone can be creature removal if you need it. Creature removal specifically that can get around indestructible, and a lot of different protection froms. If they have like a Sword of blank and blank on there that gives it protection from different colors, this gets around that. But it's also just, card draw if you just need to draw 2 cards and you're really, really desperate. The Golden Throne can be used to save you from death, and until then, it can just help out with aristocrat stuff. If your meta sees a lot of cards that lock creatures down, things like Darksteel Mutation and Song of the Dryads, then you can use it to save your commander from being turned off by sacrificing it in response to them targeting that and you losing access to those abilities. And then the Throne of Eldraine is just great for, 1 or 2 color decks as a mana rock that taps for 4 mana, but more importantly, I think in most cases, is that it's a mana rock that can repeatedly draw 2 cards for just 3 mana, which isn't a horrible rate. That's just divination right there. And again, if you're not in blue, that can really help you out of a rut. Well now, I hope that this video has helped to make it clear just how crazy good this little colorless uncommon is. And again, I cannot emphasize the fact that it's colorless. Blue is often a color that is known for card draw, and this thing can search up a lot of these mana rocks that can be card advantage. Green is a color that searches up lands a lot, but this lets you search up basics, yes, but it can also let you search up mana rocks. If you're in a color that doesn't oftentimes easily search for artifacts, that's kind of a white thing. Blue has a little bit of artifact search, and red does, but green does not do a lot of artifact search, so you can use this card for that. I'm sure that each of you that are watching this has at least one deck that could benefit from it. Personally, I have, I think, 48 constructed decks as of recording this, so I know that I have a ton of decks that I could run it in. As of recording this, you can find the card, this key, for around 70 to 80 cents, and it was printed back in about late 2021, so that's nice that it is still really affordable. Being an uncommon probably definitely helps, but if people ever catch on to just how versatile it is, and if it doesn't get a reprint soon, because it's already been about 4 years since it's been printed, then you might end up having to pay a lot more for them, especially if you're getting a lot of these. I'd actually wanted to make a video about the card Make an Example way back in the day when it was just around 50 to 70 cents. I think I bought like 10 of them at that price. I think I got a few of them when it was around $1 because I thought it was a crazy powerful card, one of the best removals. Yeah, it's sorcery speed, but it's still good. Might make a video dedicated to it one day. And then in just the last year, it has shot up from just $1 at the start of the February of last year to now it's around $5. So I need to get better at making these videos quicker. But hopefully in the future that this series will be able to help give you some ideas of hidden gems and maybe save you a buck or two. Also, are there any artifacts that you can think of that I left off? There are a whole lot more out there, artifacts that have mana abilities. I know there's a whole bunch. This video would be 5 hours if I was covering all of them. But are there any specific ones with some really cool trickery or utility that I should have included? Cough, cough, metalworker, cough, cough. I'm not sure if when I wrote that in the script, I actually meant to cough or just say the word cough, but that's where we're at. I said the word cough. Yeah, metalworker. But heck, it doesn't even need to be something as busted as metalworker, though that is a really good thing to search for. Just something like a Celestus in your werewolves deck that cares about night and day. Well, then you should probably run this key to be able to more consistently find that Celestus and all the other really, really powerful cards that I've talked about in this episode. Anyhow, that's all I've got for today's episode. As always, I hope that all of you have found this video to be entertaining at least, and I hope that a few of you have even learned something about the crazy rules in this great game of Magic. Have a good one. Ta-ta!